All right, so I guess we'll get started. This is the AppArmor Development Integration session. This is more of a hashing out some upstream development priorities, and there will be a session on Friday about what's going to happen for Precise and some other packaging issues. So to get started, one issue that we have coming out of the Security Summit was there was some agreement on how to handle LSM module unloading, which is the patch we need to have Debian be able to turn us on by default. Either we're going to have to pick that up, Tomoyo, which I don't think is likely, or maybe we can get Case to do it. But that's one of our goals. I think it's kind of a low priority for us as a current development goes, but it's something we do need for the Debian upstreaming stuff.
So that's so SC Linux can be, so that they can all be modules.
So they can all be, well, it's not that they're modules. So the agreement was what we'd do is somewhat like other parts of the kernel that get unloaded, the init section. So they'd get a tag and can be built into their own section, and so that they're not modules, they're still loaded at boot, but the ones that don't get registered are unregistered and unloaded. So it will free up the memory. And that means
they didn't want both
in
the kernel like we have, because for whatever reason.
Well, it meets the security requirement that SE Linux wants, where it has to be built in, and then loading an LSM late is problematic. And at the same time, it allows it to free memory. So there was agreement on how we could go about this from the Security Summit. It's just a matter of a patch needing to be done by somebody, and submit it and getting it upstream. Whether we pick it up, I don't know. It's one of the things that we need to look at anyways. Yeah. So I kind of tried to organize at least the first two sections on, I think, what are going to be driving our development, at least from an Ubuntu perspective, this cycle. And that's containers and dbus. So I tried to break down what needs to be done mostly for the container and the dbus stuff. I don't know what you want to cover first.
Well, we talked about containers in the LXC one, so maybe we can do the dbus one first.
We did roughly cover the container stuff, so sure, we'll hit the dbus stuff first. So there's a dbus prototype. So we have a patched dbus that is doing mediation of dbus message passing in conjunction with AppArmor policy. There needs to be feedback on what's there, what the policy should look like. So we have an example policy right now. We haven't settled on the policy language for the dbus stuff yet, or even exactly what's going to be fully mediated with the dbus. So one of the things we need to do is we need to get together with stakeholders who are interested in the dbus stuff. For example, people who are doing the apps.
Right. So we don't have to do everything we'd like to do in one go. We could just do. We don't. We could do interfaces in one step.
We do need to make sure we've got some interfaces set up and some base stuff set up. And it would be good to get in early with the stakeholders and get them testing it and seeing what they want. If there's something completely different they're looking for.
Well, honestly, I think they're taking our lead, and we're just like, this is what it can do.
Well, yeah, but it would be very good for them to sit down and actually start using
it would.
And see what they come back with and feedback on that. Because I think I'm the only person who's run it.
Right. Yeah. Can we? That's one of the things I want to do is what needs to be done so more people can start.
So we do have the packages up. We should get it into a PPA. so that people can start testing it. The problem with getting it into the PPA is right now the test version is requiring updated AppArmor stuff. It's requiring updated parser. It's requiring updated a custom dbus package and a custom kernel.
Oh, custom kernel. Mm.
Yes.
Some dbus.
And the kernel interface is going to change within this cycle as one of the things we need to finish hashing out.
Right.
I threw in so at the AppArmor level, the interface doesn't necessarily have to change, but the kernel interface part has to change.
Right.
Because I kind of hacked that one in there. Because we don't have one of the priorities that comes out of the container session, as well as last cycle, one of our work items was the new introspection interface, which isn't done yet. And we need to get that done ASAP. So with dbus, the prototype patch, like I said, the syntax and semantics, there still needs to be some work on that. One of the big questions on that is whether we want to allow it to delve into the message contents or not.
That is exactly what I was thinking about. As a first step, maybe not.
We can do that.
Sure.
It's not a problem. The data's there. The question is how we do that. Obviously, we don't want to be throwing the message contents as part of a query to the kernel.
Right.
If we can mmap the policy DB back into user space, which is one of the things I'd like to do with the interface update, then we don't even have to query the kernel. Is what we have to get is we have to say, I want to mmap this policy DB, and then we have to watch for event changes, or policy changes events, so that we know, oh, well, the policy's been updated, we need to drop this mmap and grab a new one.
So you're not talking about mapping kernel memory?
Yes.
Okay.
There are things that do that.
Okay.
It would be read-only. Basically, it's a way of sharing the structure.
Right. Is our structure?
The other way we can do that is we can export that from a file, and we can copy it so the memory's not shared.
Right.
And then we have the DB again. The reason we want to do this is we want to avoid the load interface having to load something over to dbus and something to the kernel. So either it's going to have to pull it out of the kernel, or it's going to have to share it with the kernel. Either way. And then we can do the matching fully in user space, which is a performance win, and I think a security win as well. It's one less thing to worry about.
Right. So we can't write that user space mediation. I mean, I know we can't write that this cycle. You know, for user space to be able to mediate the message, the daemon.
What do you mean?
To be able to I'm just saying, I don't think we have the time to.
We're already mediating the message.
No, the contents of it.
The contents is easy. So from a content point of view, how you would do it is we have the matching engine, you have access to the matching engine, you give it the regex that you want to match against. So you can say, we're going to match against type blah, blah, blah.
So this is going to be something that's
and it would just scan down that string in the matching engine and match it. It's actually not a huge one to do.
So
So the dbus string is the message
right.
data is serialized. What the support that's needed to be added is the parser support to make the regex that would scan that.
Right. Well, I guess I'm a little concerned about, and we already have issues in terms of memory usage and the computing the DFA.
So the computing the DFA is separate from the DFA's final size.
Right. I guess it just feels like nothing in kernel space is ever going to use the dbus content regexes, so shoving those into kernel memory seems
True. Whether we want to actually push those into the kernel memory is another thing we should actually look at. So right now, it's being set up as a single policy DFA.
Right.
We certainly don't have to push those things into kernel memory, and we could detect that AppArmor dbus is up and have the loader feed that piece directly to the dbus daemon. That's more work that could be done. That's another way to approach it. So yeah, but I wouldn't worry about the matching so much. That's actually not hard to do.
I guess I think I shared Jamie's perspective that we shouldn't make it a priority to get that.
Right, I mean, my feeling is.
I agree.
Whatever infrastructure needs to be there so we can add that later, awesome. Assuming doesn't take a ton of time. But
The only other thing we're not currently matching on is the message method type. So whether it's a method, a signal, we have that information. I just didn't set up the policy that way, and I was looking for feedback on that. That was in the mail that I sent out.
yeah,
And that's just going to take people playing with it, determining whether they actually want that information. From a policy perspective, I didn't see there being much difference between saying, I want to be able to, write out this method and write out this signal, or send this signal, send this method versus, I'm going to send, you also, when you want to receive something back from a method, you have to say that I want to receive it anyways, right? So I didn't see a real need for that because we're already sort of doing a mapping there in the permissions.
well, so getting back to what I asked before, what do we need to do to get it so like even just Steve and I can play with it and have it?
You can play with it right now in a VM if you install the debs.
So, and you said we needed debs for libappArmor, the kernel, dbus. Was there a fourth one?
libappArmor, parser, kernel, and dbus.
Parser.
And dbus is multiple debs, and there's multiple
Sure.
debs throughout. That
But
mail I
it's
sent out
built out of
has-
one source deb.
Right,
correct?
so it's
dbus is built out of one source deb.
Right, so it's really.
three packages, three
Yeah.
sources. And
Yes. And so we can set up PPAs for that. I'd avoided doing that so far because there was the multiple and
And this is the dbus 1.4 with the patch that's,
so right.
it's
There's
not the modularized.
There's two patches. I've got a very early start on a LSM style patch for dbus to allow multiple plugins, security plugins, and this is just the direct patch.
Right. So does it make sense for us to do the direct patch so that we can iron out the kinks and get the policy language
Yes.
going and do all that? And then once we feel like we've nailed that, and we're using it, then maybe next cycle or if
Right,
we have
there's-
time, we do the 1.5.
There's no way this cycle that we're going to get the LSM style
Yeah, okay.
patch up. Because, that one, we're going to want to iterate on it, we're going to
Yep.
want to post it out to the dbus mailing list, we're going to get feedback on it, we're going to have to iterate on it again. That's going to take a while to get it upstream. I don't see a point trying to do that one until that one becomes more stable.
Yeah, it would also, it would be nice if we could prove that this is, even just the technique that we're using is viable.
So, and the current prototype, there are things to be done on it. There's some cleanups to be done. There are some bugs that there's current workarounds for, and things need to get fixed, other places to fix those.
Sure. So I install these packages.
Mm-hmm.
The part, I can put something in a profile and it'll mediate.
Yes.
All right. So we can play with it and then we can
It's-
iterate on that policy language. But I think we kind of decided it was mostly right, didn't we?
I think there, it's not bad. I'm not it's to what I saw was, might be desired.
Right.
But that doesn't mean once other people start looking at it and playing with it
Right.
more, that there isn't things to be done. So, We need other people looking at it is where it's at right now.
Is there like an example target that maybe we should pick of something that uses dbus that we could use to sort of drive feedback for ourselves?
Well, so,
You just, anything that uses dbus right now will, if you've got a profile on it, it's going to start getting denials. So you bring it up in complaint mode, the profile in complaint mode, and you start getting a whole bunch of things. I mean,
so, right, we would need to do that, and then we can identify the things that we don't want to do dbus mediation on right now, so then we could figure out how to disable that.
Now, one of the things I think we're going to have problems with this cycle, I don't know if we can get, is the conditional profile stuff. I certainly want to get the base conditional stuff. We need to get the base conditional stuff done at the DFA level, the permission rework at the base level, but whether we expose it to all the rules and stuff is another level of work beyond that.
Can you refresh my memory, like maybe with a
So-
simple example on that conditional?
So the conditional rule would be you're allowed to send this message on this interface if you're sending it to someone who's confined by this
Oh, right.
profile
Right.
equals blah,
Yeah.
blah, blah. You know, this person's been confined and labeled as opposed to an open, you can send this to anybody on this interface.
And you said preliminary work needs to happen.
So there's two layers. There's the getting the permission rework done, the structure, the layout. That's going to be used anyways by owner conditionals, which we already expose in file rules and stuff, right?
All right.
But whether we take the next step to expose, say, label equals blah and profile equals blah for other rules, that's another step of work beyond. And so we've got to attack this in priority order, where we need the permission rework done, and that's a requirement because that's a base thing for a whole bunch of other things. And then if we have time, we can say, well, conditional this, we'll build that in.
Right.
And that's extending the parser and the compiler and the matching engine.
Where do dbus
Oh, right.
rejections show up?
They currently are going to syslog. If it's built with audit log, with audit D package installed, it's supposed to use the lib. I haven't tested this yet. It's supposed to use libaudit stuff and compile against that as well. But
You're
it's
talking
not-
about dbus.
the dbus package, yeah. So right now, I've got it set up, so if audit D is there, it'll try to log to audit D. And there needs to be some cleanups there because I made some changes. And if it fails, then it just sends it the syslog stuff.
Right, so that's one reason why we want to get audit D in there, so that we can at least build dbus
With the
it.
audit extensions?
Right.
Okay.
And so, I mean, we don't have to build it that way. That I think as a patch perspective, that's an optional, it's not a required depends, it's an optional depends type thing. Because you can log it to syslog and you get the functionality, your message isn't going necessarily the best, but.
So, right, so that's a configure option, it detects it, and it should, okay. No, okay.
You know, whatever. There are extensions that need to be done besides, well, there's the bug stuff that needs to be done, like the A get peercon.
Oh, but just back up just a little bit. Steve asked about testing. So so there's two things. I had defined a table of preliminary tests in the wiki specification that need to actually be written. But I mean, what to test is there. And then there's some tests in dbus that test Python dbus binding that could be really easy, because it's like, here's a server, then it's like 10 lines of code, and we could
Okay.
easily move that over into QRT, even into, AppArmor. And so it would make a really easy way to test too.
Yeah, I don't have any testing beyond just the manual stuff I've done.
Yeah.
Right, I mean, so there's testing for correctness, but it was also an attempt to get feedback in terms of
Certainly.
the sort of, whether our policy language is the way we want it.
And I think there
Yeah.
are things to discuss in the policy language. I don't know if now's the right place.
Probably not, or else
There's a long list.
we'll just be
Yeah.
here all week.
Well, yeah. But again, we haven't gotten any feedback trying to.
We need to
on
play
mailing
with it.
list or stuff.
Yes.
We can't talk,
Yeah.
Steve and I can't talk, well, I can't talk intelligently about it until I play with it.
Right.
I won't
understand.
speak for you.
I may not be able to talk intelligibly even if I do play with it.
Well, I didn't want to commit you to that.
So I think that's a quick overview of what the D-Bus stuff is, and I think we're gonna move on from there.
Sure.
I don't know, container work, whether we want to cover any of that right now. There's certainly stuff to be
Well,
done that wasn't covered.
Did you, so what I was hoping is that this one and the second one, we would define the things we want to do so that we at least have a list that then we can assign how long it'll take to each item and prioritize it. So what I see here is it looks like you added a bunch of stuff as a result of the conversation from the other day, or yesterday.
Some of it.
All right, so is there anything in there that,
I think most of it was covered in there. I think it's just broken down a little better.
yeah,
That we're gonna need some command line tools set up for the stack, artificial, the stack stuff. There certainly needs to be testing for that. There needs to be some API development on that end on how is best to interact with setting up a stack and namespace stuff. Other than that, it's basically the same stuff going through the LXC stuff. It's better broken down.
that is a long list. I
That's
realize you
pruned.
pretty fine grained.
No, that's pruned. Don't ask.
Well,
We
we'll
can skip.
prioritize that, I guess, later.
No, that has to be done, pretty much.
That whole list has to be done?
Yeah.
To do the one little thing that they want to do to confine?
Yes.
Icky. All right, well, we'll talk about all that.
It plays into, some of the stuff actually shares with the DBUS stuff. For example, they need policy introspection, it needs a policy introspection interface, the DBUS needs a policy introspection interface. So they're shared work items there.
Right. So that's the SysFS thing, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So Steve, I wanted to ask you, you don't have to say yes or no. You can even say, think about it. You can say no or yes. It's up to you. So the introspection interface, Case had said that he would do it, but he did not. Since I realize it's the kernel side, but since there's already existing SysFS stuff and you're familiar with at least what's happening and what we have, is that something that you'd consider being able to do, that part of it, to free up JJ for some of the other stuff?
Certainly consider it.
Well, look into it.
Yeah.
You don't have to commit beyond that, because I have no idea how long that would take to do for you, or for me to have to learn all that.
Guarantee I'll be slower, but
Right. All right.
All right, going down the list, it would be really nice for the next release to standardize some API and use it that we don't have right now. So this would allow management tools. For example, SUSE has their YAS tool that they're running into some problems with and will be as we go forward. And we will want to be having our own management tools. For example, setting a profile into complaint. If we had an API for it, it doesn't matter how we're actually doing it at the back end. You use the API, and the API will take care of it. Complaint, enforce, disable.
So, how are we implementing that? You mean like we have a C library, we have all of it, and then
I
tools just
don't
use
care
that?
how it gets implemented, as long as we have an API that everything that's doing it, all the tools that are doing it, call to.
Right, so that's part of the rewrite of user space.
Well, yeah, it is part of the rewrite of user space, but it doesn't, to enable or disable a profile the way we're doing it right now, we don't need to parse the profile per se. We don't, and even if we do, we could feed the current API through how we're doing it. It's just trying to centralize it instead of having it in each tool.
Doing all the same.
And then SUSE's YAST, instead of doing their own thing, because that's, they could call that when a management tool for us, if we throw one in, which would be nice to have, could, just call that. That's not something I'm going to commit to doing, but it would be something, if somebody has some time, it would be nice to have. And it's something somebody could work on that's completely independent from other stuff.
Okay.
The library, I need to extend it to the AA Stack Con and AA Stack profile stuff for the LXC container stuff. That's actually a small extension to the library. It's just it's very similar to the profile, change profile we have now.
Right.
It's just a small option. I would like, though I don't see how we're going to get it this cycle, an API to get the file labeling. We can get file labeling off of things. One of the question is if we fake XAdder reads. So I need to look at the kernel interface more. And SE Linux, how it does is it looks and grabs the XAdder off of a file to see what the label is. We could potentially fake that read to return the security attribute, the labeling of that file. Or we have our own interface. If we could fake it, that would probably be this preferred way, because then the SE Linux tool or things that support the -Z option, like ls-c, would work. And how you would get your labeling back is your labeling wouldn't. So the file labeling I want to return is not the single profile labeling of can this profile access it. It's the compound labeling of here's the
All
list,
the profiles.
here's the profiles. This is the intersection, which is expensive to compute on a per file basis if we have lots of profiles.
Right.
But if we are sharing profiles, it becomes a lot cheaper,
Right.
which is one of the things we're working towards.
Do we have, is there limitations in the XAdder interface as to length?
There are some limitations.
Okay.
I think XAdders, it's somewhat, if I remember it right, this is if I remember Linux XAdders right, I'm pretty sure it's file system dependent. And the minimum size supported is a block, but it lets the file system choose to support more up to 65K, I think.
Right, because something like libc is going to be into every profile.
Right. And one of the things we should consider discussing is some standard aliasing or something to collapse those down. We don't have that right now, but that's something we could consider, which would make the compound profile, the compound labeling smaller. The rest of it's just refactoring of user space that slowly is happening, like the policy load. I'd love to get it done this cycle. I'm not going to get it done this cycle, where the policy load stuff is its own library interface that's separated out.
Right.
Or that the DFA computation or parser front end. Well, it's part of it's gonna happen this cycle. Some of the work towards that's gonna happen this cycle, but the full is just not gonna happen. I mean, it's lower priority anyways, but you know, what you get done is what you get done.
Yeah.
We're not gonna get the interface this cycle. It's still just gonna be the tools. We need something done with genprof, logprof, updating.
Updating. You
I'm
mean
not
update the tools?
I'm not even asking for the replacement right now. I'm just asking them to base function.
Yeah.
They kind of function right now, but like, for example, we have the bug where the die rules aren't
Yeah, well, I think one of the things, maybe it's not on here, right.
being picked up.
I had, someone added a bugs thing. There's an alias bug in logprof not updating for denials.
So that's Christian Bolt's bug right now with the aliasing. That needs to be moved. And it's a pretty severe bug in that it really affects policy. If you have aliases, they don't get properly applied when the alias is being applied over rules that have regexes in them that overlap the alias.
I did not follow that, but I trust you that it's a bug.
So think of it this way.
I don't need to follow it.
Aliases get partially applied to policy.
Icky.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know how to fix it. It's going to be a couple days' work, at least. And then some verification and stuff, which is more work beyond the actual patching. I think it's something that's really important to fix, because that's aliasing as our solution that we use for union file system and stuff. So, because we have to be able to support reading both those paths.
So, well, well, it seems like, since we're talking about those tools, so last time we had a number of bugs, or work items surrounding these tools. And now I'm wondering if, while they're worthy, which of those would we want to move forward? I guess we would need to look at them. Move forward, yes. Fix eventually, but in terms of this cycle.
Well, they basically
People
broke
don't
down
live
into
in
update. I just put a generic point, really, which was updating. We can break that down more into the multiple points. Updating basically covers what they were, the work items.
Right. So do we want to break that out now and talk about what's worthwhile? Or is that part of our priority discussion?
We can break it out if you want.
Well, you're leading this.
I think right now, that would be more like a second pass run through
Okay,
this.
sounds good.
We've got tomorrow's session for the second pass run through this, so we can just keep going on that right now.
Cool.
The AA profile stuff, which is part of the AA sandboxing stuff you've done, I don't know where we should prioritize that. I think
Well, the sandboxing, AA sandbox, I think should be pretty low.
and that
Because there's a
kinda-
lot of overlap with
Containers and
arcos and
arcos
all
and,
that.
yeah.
So, but AA profiles, which is a horrible name, would be excellent because it would allow like these guys to be able to
Right,
have that in their SDK or whatever and make it easy for people.
to generate profiles.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's good for charms too.
Yes.
Yes.
And so I think the
Yeah,
sandboxing, I
yeah.
think Jamie's right, is sandboxing is very low priority. And I'm willing to let you run that with that when you have time, if you ever have time.
I will slowly walk with that.
Yes. But the AA profiles is certainly a higher priority. We need to look at updating that.
Yeah, that's a silly, it's easy. It would just have to, like, run stuff through it and, make sure it's adding what we want and everything.
Yes, it's just a work
It's just
item,
time.
time to do, right. And I would love some monitoring stuff, the Nagios and all those integration. I don't
Did you
see it
have
happening
something
this
for
time.
that?
It didn't, I meant to. It was,
Yeah, I fiddled with it a little bit. And then I didn't like the fact that I had to run stuff as root, and then I was trying to do all this other stuff, and then I just gave up.
were you fiddling within Nagios or?
Yeah, I know Munin has the thing where you can declare that this is its root. The problem was audit D. It was fine with syslog, but it was audit D
Right.
that I was trying to account
Right.
for.
And that brings back again the AE event D stuff and whatnot that Christian was having problems with too, right? The AE event D was monitoring.
Yeah.
I mean, half of it's taken care of by AA Notify, the other half isn't. But if we could put it into some other tool, it would be great. We're not bringing back AA event D. Well, I don't see doing it anyways.
No.
So I should probably rename the, put that in the run.
Yeah, we should.
rename that and actually get it in our tree.
Yes, please.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what the best solutions for monitoring are right now. And I didn't spend any time looking at it.
Right.
Is there anything we want done more with AA Notify
I'm
with
sure
the
there's
cycle?
a time.
Well, I'm sure there is, but
All right, so right now, you can use it with Notify OSD, and it'll work with syslog notifications or audit. You can also run it and there's a summary of what's happened in the last day, which is useful in like a bash or RC.
what about a summary cutoff? So when you have 50 messages coming in, we don't
Oh, right,
get
that was the other thing.
Rate limiting.
message after
Yeah.
message after message.
We had a work item last cycle that I didn't work on, that was rate limiting. Well, yeah, I did look on it, I spent 3 or 4 hours going cross-eyed at the pro source. So I didn't- and,
It's Perl, what do you expect? I mean, isn't that like a requirement of the language?
right, and didn't implement it.
Right.
So that's something that we need to.
Is that on here?
I didn't actually, it's just was monitoring. I don't think I have an individual item for AA event D at this point.
You
Right.
mean AA Notify?
Oh,
Or, I mean,
there,
AA
it's under
Notify.
tools, right.
Okay.
Notify.
Rate limiting.
Hello.
Hi. How are you guys doing?
Good.
Great.
How's AppArmor doing?
Great.
Busy.
Really?
Well, this is a lot of work, busy
Yeah.
work. So we've covered the two, I think, our two drivers for this cycle already. We can skim back over those. The two big work items coming out for this cycle are container integration, so we're working well with containers. And that comes at two levels. Though we're not going to be able to get full stacking this cycle, we want the base stacking stuff. So what stacking is for us is we'll be able to have a system policy and a child policy, so the container can have its own policy separate from system policy. So the system can lock down the container, what the container can do, and then the child itself can have lockdowns on what it's doing. One of the problems with the LSM right now is it's not
Container free.
It's not container friendly. It's not got a namespace. Though we actually have namespaces in policy already, and we've been working towards that within AppArmor. And
Yeah, so
there's-
like right now, I mean, outside of LXC, we can have the host have one policy and a namespace have a completely different, like MySQL and the host is confined one way. In the namespace, it can be unconfined, confined a different way, complain mode.
Right.
So just explain that to me. Is the kernel mechanism that LXC uses called namespaces?
Yeah, actually, after our talk, I went like through this whole, I researched a bunch of stuff, which we could talk about
Separately?
now or
Okay.
later. I have a to-do item to talk to you today about that.
Okay.
But yeah, namespace is container, that's the kernel part, and then you have LXC or libvirt or all these other things that are tools to set up namespaces to make it easy for people to use them. And then there's a syscall interface to the kernel, which they all use.
And so that's the one big work item, getting that integration in so that it's working.
The LXC part.
Yeah, integration with the containers, the LLC. And the other big one is dbus. So we have a dbus patch so that dbus becomes a trusted daemon in the mediation, and it starts mediating on rules and stuff. So we can mediate the method calls between applications.
That's really interesting.
And
The patch is written, well, right,
There's
we have to
iteration.
iterate on it, but John has it, and
How does
we're
that-
at the place where we can play with it, not to give it to people to play with. We have to, there's some things we need to
From
do.
a performance point of view, are you essentially just saying who can talk to who?
so there's two ways to approach it. How the patch is done is it's on the dbus daemon itself. So it's not like a proxy where you're copying through the messages. So your slowdown isn't the proxy slowdown, because you're not having messages to the proxy and then proxy copy and then send it back up and to the dbus and then another copy across. So it's near native dbus performance. And then is what it does is dbus does a call in to the security extension we have, and it says, and in the security rules, the policies, it's flexible, and you can say, I want to just allow, maybe I just want to allow messages on this interface, or maybe I want to allow messages to this address, or maybe this method call within this address, or I want to allow method calls on this address, this method on this address, to someone confined by this.
So you've got a language to express.
We have a very flexible
And
language.
is that, but you're dependent on the dbus daemon to,
Right, the dbus daemon has to be patched to do this.
right, so it's not being enforced at the kernel level in any way, shape, or form.
Well, there is enforcement at the kernel level too, in that, so the task that wants to talk to dbus has to have permission to talk to dbus, it has to have the Unix domain socket to talk to dbus, and dbus, again, the child as well. And that's where the kernel sees the communication, as it sees client A talking to dbus and client B talking to dbus. But dbus is doing the multiplexing, and that's why it has to be the trusted agent in the middle.
Okay.
And that's what SC Linux is doing in their dbus mitigation.
What are the advantages to using AppArmor for this over dbus's existing security policy?
Well, the problem now is that every application has to define basically the policy, right? And, you know.
They have to
maybe
protect themselves.
Right,
Can't
so
system
evolution
policy
exposes your context. Maybe that's okay. I mean, it has to do it in a very generic way, because a lot of applications might talk to it. It's not gonna say, I won't talk to you, but I'll talk to you. You know, but with AppArmor, we can do that. And it is something we would want to do, particularly in stuff that you guys would.
So an application offer would say, I want anybody possible to be able to talk to me. Whereas at a system policy, we're saying, no. I only want to let the browser talk to this thing because everything else is untrusted.
Right.
Right.
It allows you to get the system level.
So the status of that is, there's a prototype, I guess you could say. There's a patch for dbus. He's got the IPC stuff in the kernel. We have some
Doesn't
interfaces
sound-
defined in libappArmor, but we need to iterate on the language.
Doesn't sound like a 1204 requirement, to be honest.
Well,
First one does, I think.
Right. I think the containers is more important. We're not sure on the dbus stuff. It will kind of depend on, how important it would be to Juju roll out, or, what they're doing, what they want to do there.
I mean, one of the kinds of app insulation stories has got to be the dbus,
Right.
the dbus thing. It just,
Right.
I think the reality is that app insulation story is really going to play out on the road to 14.04. So if we get too worried about it for 12.04, we might just choke a little. The reality is that the language might need to be refined, the dbus
And-
implementation might need to be refined.
That's where we're at right now, and we want people to start playing with, not everybody playing with it, but people who are interested and want to help us refine the language. That's where
Right.
we're at.
But then that seems to be more like something we can put out there, but not focus on for 12.04.
Yeah, it's not a focus, but it's something we certainly need people who are interested in starting to give feedback on.
Right, but let me say, if I was to choose
We've got
between
2 years.
a dbus that wasn't carrying an interesting patch, and was therefore, at least, even if it didn't have that lockdown capability, it performed more predictably for 12.04 versus a dbus which performed less predictably, or was less maintainable, but which had this sort of prototype patch in it. For 12.04, I would choose the
Okay.
more predictable one.
Well, I hear you. And actually, that'll
There may
make
be
it
other
better
things that
because
override that, but it's just, it would be my.
I don't know. I mean, honestly, talking to David, he would like it, but we have to
Which
measure
David?
it.
Bob.
Bart, we'd have to measure it too. And so, because there's already problems.
Yeah.
And so,
I think it's nice to have around, kick it around in a PPA, circulate it upstream, but I think 12.04. We know we're not going to get it exactly right.
yeah.
Right.
So for 12.04, we should focus on things.
I think we'd like it, but we likely wouldn't make any use of it whatsoever without the funds again. So, I don't know what you call it before, AA policy.
Yeah, it's called AA profiles, which is
AA profiles.
horrendously.
We'll rename
I
it.
think we
But
need
it's
something along those
Sounds like a
lines
dating
before we make
agency.
use of any.
Yeah, and it's,
It does.
we have AppArmor profiles package, and it's just,
Yeah.
I just wrote it one night, it's last cycle.
Where are we with AppArmor profiles and Debian?
So user space, Case got the user space into Debian. The problem we have with Debian right now is the kernel part. They won't turn it on. And
So it's there, it's upstream.
But they won't turn it on because every LSM that gets loaded takes up kernel memory that can't be unloaded currently. We discussed this at Security Summit, Plumbers.
So first they wouldn't carry the patch.
First, they wouldn't carry the
They
patch.
said if you get it upstream, that's okay.
Yeah.
And it's upstream, and so we won't turn it on because it takes up kernel memory.
Right.
Not,
It's not that it takes up kernel memory, it's that every LSM, so if we turn on every LSM, and there's 4 or 5 of them now, each one of them is loaded into the kernel and taking up memory. And they don't actually take up very much memory, but they still won't do it. We discussed it.
This sounds like very poor.
Yeah, we discussed it at Security Summit. And we came up with a plan that seemed to be acceptable.
until we implement
It's
it.
unfortunate because it's very hard for us to help Debian with its security,
Right.
which people ask us to do,
Yes.
except through a mechanism like that.
That said, profiles are being put into the Debian packages. The user space is there. There's documentation on how to get it going in their kernel if someone wants to use it.
Okay, so
But not
it's
ideal.
in the kernel. The system administrator can turn
It's
it
a,
on.
yeah, no, it's a
Package-
K config. You have to rebuild the kernel.
Well,
That's the problem.
So it's not modularized. You can't.
No,
Well, that's the LSM.
that's the LSM.
How much memory are we talking about?
For all 4 LSMs, 5 LSMs, a few hundred K.
And for just one?
So they'll
AppArmor?
right now they've defaulted to SE Linux because they had it on, and so that's the one they're choosing. So we're at, for the AppArmor, I can't remember what it was exactly, but we're talking 50, 60K. But we do have a plan on how to unload the modules on LSM. We went through and vetted it at Security Summit. We discussed it, and it's basically a small patch. So you know how the kernel currently loads. You have your init sections on code, and that init section get unloaded. We'll have a new section for security modules, and the security modules that don't get when the registration get unloaded.
All right. Let's see if that does the trick.
Yeah. Oh, we don't like that. No. How important would that be? Because John was saying that it didn't
I'm hoping
sound
Case will
like.
actually pick it up.
Yeah, well, we can bug
Because
it.
Case was interested in it.
Because obviously SC Linux isn't going to care, they're there. And Tomoya.
And
didn't seem
Tomoyo
to
is
be-
interested as well. Tomoyo has
But to do
been
the
doing,
work?
they've been doing a whole bunch of work to try. The problem right now with Tomoyo is how much time they have to work on it.
Yeah.
So I can't commit to one tomorrow.
That's a common
They're
trouble.
interested, yes. Well, they put a whole bunch of effort into making a Tomoyo that could kind of be modularized.
Oh, right.
And they still couldn't get that in because, of course, it's the base hooks with the base little Tomoyo thing and then a module, right? But that still wasn't enough for Debian. And then Tomoyo hasn't had a lot of resources since. But
And
Tomoyo
at the end of
maybe
the
is.
day, vastly more users of Ubuntu.
Right.
And at the end of the day, we're committed to a security story for Ubuntu. We've done a lot of work on that. And if Debian doesn't want to take it, that's okay.
And you know, I mean, our maintenance,
It's-
it's being pushed there, so we can still do syncs, and people that are playing with it, we don't get as many bugs from them. It's not quite as useful, but
It would be a nice contribution.
Yeah.
Seems self-destructive somehow on the other side.
It does.
50K.
Maybe I don't understand something. Okay, but it sounds like good work.
John,
Thank you.
I mean, I want to just shout out that John did really great work last cycle on all that. He
Thank you.
had-
And I hear on namespaces and containers too.
Yeah, a little bit. I think most of the credit goes to Serge and Stefan.
Who's carrying most of that? I mean, what's the dynamic in the kernel community around namespaces? Are we doing a reasonable chunk of that?
Who's carrying most of it right now?
Is that
There
Wayne?
is, I'm not sure where Eric is.
Yeah.
What company is Eric with? Do you know?
Actually, I do, and so we are doing stuff, Serge is doing a lot with it, and one of the main guys is currently unemployed, and there's been discussion of having him help maybe
Oh,
on a,
okay.
you know.
I mean, if we have specific goals for
Right,
for namespaces.
and,
Where was he previously?
I don't recall. Robbie, I talked to Robbie about LXC this morning as well, and he was the one who mentioned it. He has the details on that. I mean, really, and again, was going to be part of the conversation, but it would help with, one of the things he wants to do is get UID namespaces. So like, we have namespaces for PIDs, for network, for UTS name. One of the ones that's missing is UID. So like root in the namespace is root outside of the namespace. You know, UID 1000 is one, yeah, and so that's one of the reasons why it's not root strong. And so, and he's written, I guess, the patches, but there needs to be review and iteration.
There was prototyping of it.
Yeah.
It was very rough prototyping.
I think talking to Serge, that might be some of the work they're interested in.
They're certainly interested in, it's currently stalled out at that level.
Yeah.
The root hardening stuff is stalled out. But work-wise, Eric was a big one. I'm not sure where he was at. He's still a big contributor there. Serge and Daniel's now in Monaro, and Serge was with us. And we got Stefan on the user space tools, doing some work there with Arcos and LXC.
And Serge, so, right.
And there is some Red Hat contribution too.
Yeah, I mentioned that. So there's the kernel stuff, which we just mentioned, and we're a good contributor there with Serge. And then there's like, I mentioned the syscalls, and then there's two different sets of tools that utilize those syscalls, and it's LXC tools. And that's kind of there are two camps. There's that, and then there's libvirt. And for some reason, they're both called LXC, but they're completely different. They're completely different implementations that use those syscalls. All right, so
What are we using in OpenStack with LXC? The libvirt. So we're making active use of both of them.
yeah, and Orchestra uses LXC, and Arcos uses LXC. But what I was getting at is Serge is actually, and Stefan are both doing a lot of contributions to the LXC tools. And then Serge is also doing work on the libvirt stuff.
Is there a way we can just collapse that down and just use libvirt? So would there be a
Yeah.
reason to do that?
Absolutely, you'd have to talk to the server team. manager. I mean, basically, it's just the choice of tool. I don't know why Orchestra picked LXC.
Juju, actually.
Oh, was it
Orchestra
Juju?
uses LXC, yeah. The local provider uses the LXC tools. Primarily because when we were developing it, we had LXC upstream, and they.
Libvirt has
it's a more
been
complete
lagging
implementation,
behind.
is that don't use
Well, you know,
Libvirt.
Libvirt's
So we had
always,
Stefan and
Well,
Serge and.
The point
actually
being,
all
the LXC
upstreams
tools
were there.
existed
And we
before
asked them, and they
Libvirt
said,
even had
Right.
support.
This is the more complete implementation.
And so I think that's
So
part
Libvirt
of
one
it.
is incomplete, has a few holes.
And so is that why Juju uses the LXC?
Yeah.
Not Libvirt?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, well then let's use LXC.
right. Of course, Libvirt is our standard virtualization technology for KVM. So I think part of it is that Libvirt, you know, it's an abstraction, and so it's kind of a lowest common denominator, so you can't get to everything underneath. But it's also good because it's really nice to be able to write Nova on top of it, right? And so I don't know, Libvirt might have come farther and satisfied the needs, I can't say.
I
But
think-
there is work there, for sure.
I think LXC upstream, I mean, we have some of them working for us, and they're interested in making sure the Libvirt one works exactly like theirs. The differences are mechanical almost, like it's just that Libvirt does things slightly different because it's made for virtualization, not containerization. So they kind of had to do things in a way that the LXC authors are not really happy about, but I think they're getting more comfortable with that. Like they get that an abstraction layer is a powerful thing to get LXC in more people's hands. So I think they'll actually converge,
Oh,
and,
good.
and LXC will just become the tools that call natively, and Libvirt will be the abstraction layer that calls the same syscalls, which is pretty much how it works now. I'd love to have them comment on it, though. I'm not a complete expert on this. This is just me proxying their points about it.
I
Surge
expect,
would be
because it's
an
the
excellent
same
resource
people
to have.
a lot that are working on the two, I expect that it will get refactored and pulled together mostly.
Yeah, I do too.
So Red Hat is
Sounds-
Libvirt,
sounds-
and we're contributing there. They're a good upstream, they take stuff from us all the time.
Libvirt.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then, but we're driving a lot of development in LXC and also contributing a lot to the kernel. So that, yeah, I just wanted to summarize that.
So it's namespaces in the kernel where we're a good contributor, the LXC upstream where we're a good contributor, and then we passing patches to Libvirt.
For LXC,
For-
we're also a big, of course, we've got the KVM security driver for AppArmor in Libvirt, which we wrote.
Right. Good stuff. Very good and very precise cycle.
Yes. Oh, and the other thing, there's a session, you know, the whole Juju and AppArmor integration. So we want to be pursuing that too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's not
Be
so
fun.
much this session, but.